Charlie. And we know the answer. It just came out. It was the Iranians.
I was going to bring that up. I couldn't believe it. So I was watching the RNC, the Republican National Convention yesterday, and there was a breaking news report, and it said there is a Iranian assassination attempt, or the Iranians are backing some type of assassination attempt that's been foiled by the U.S. government on Trump. They said that it wasn't related to Thomas Crooks, but yes, the Iranians are out to assassinate Trump. And of course, they didn't provide any proof or evidence. They just said it and then went back to it. Like, what is this coming from? I hate this so much because I have friends that are smart friends, that
but they
know
fall
very
for
well.
that stuff, right?
They when this happened, they said they're in a group chat. Everybody's going on, and one of my really smart friends, he's like, his money was on it was either China, Russia, or Iran. And I said, the probability of that, in my opinion, is close to zero. If it's could be any foreign nation, it's going to be the Ukrainians. But most likely, it's just someone with Trump derangement syndrome, which it seems like still seems to be the most likely case.
Right.
But
well, again, you just I mean, you could make an argument for Iran. They certainly have motive. The fact is that Trump assassinated their hero, Soleimani, and they would. In a way, they would be justified doing it. But that's just not the way Iran operates. Iran's actually very cautious. There's also the talk about, they're always described as wild madmen. But they're very cautious. And they know that something like this, if they in fact did something like this, they would bring down the wrath of the U.S. Military on them. And they don't want that. They might... Who knows? They might even win the war eventually, but it would be devastating to Iran. It would be absolutely devastating, and they do not want it. So it's anybody who understands the way actually Iranian foreign policy has been conducted and how they've dealt with all kinds of provocations, such as the assassination of General Soleimani over the last years and decades, just knows this is not Iranian behavior. I think Ukraine would be more likely. I don't. And some people have said, like within Russia, and even I think a Ukrainian has said that's pointed the finger at them, because they do have a history of assassinating. And they just the other day,
Budanov, right?
Budanov, came out. I like the dark Budanov. Who likes he conducts his interviews in the dark because he likes being in the dark. Just a genocidal maniac. He goes on and on about how he likes killing Russians. But he admitted that they had attempted to assassinate Putin, several times. Obviously they failed, but. So this is something they do, and they have assassinated many people, in Russia and in the former Ukrainian territories.
I want to take a second just to.
But I don't think it is them. I think it is a lone gunman. I'm still going with that until I see solid proof.
I want to take a second just to talk about Budanov's statement saying that they have tried to assassinate Putin, and it seems like it's still something that they're wanting to do. Just how crazy that is. That statement in itself should just put alarm bells in everybody's head and saying, we can't be supporting this. You can't be supporting countries that are open to assassinate heads of state, especially the head of state of the most powerful nuclear country in the world.
Right.
Like that
very,
Budanov
very
saying that is that's a threat to the whole world.
Right.
Because if you do succeed, okay, you killed Putin. What happens now? Right. What we do know that within the Russian government is that there's a lot of pressure because Putin is too rational and too slow in his movement. Most of the pressure, too restrained. Yeah, most of the political pressure he has in Russia is to go be more aggressive and say like, hey, look what they did to killing these kids in Crimea or Belgorod. The blood is running hot in Russia right now.
Right.
And for valid reasons.
And in fact,
thank God we have Putin to say, calm down,
Yeah. Yeah, so frankly, I mean, if they've been trying to assassinate him, then the Russians would be fully justified in trying to assassinate Zelensky. I imagine that Zelensky was probably not too happy about that statement, but I don't think they have any such intention.
Right. I mean, Zelensky isn't even really the official leader of Ukraine anymore, right? I mean, there's no elections. His term ended months ago.
But he is the leader of Ukraine. I mean, but legally, you can make an argument that he's not. I understand.
Yeah. All right. Where were we right before we went off on this tangent?
Iran.
Okay, right, Iran. So, what do you know anything about the basis of this claim that Iran is trying to?
No. Typically they don't give you anything. It's just It's just an unnamed source. That's the way it is. And so
it pisses me off because I know
the intelligence agencies just have a way of they can feed when they want to generate a rumor or whatever. They feed it to certain well-connected journalists, and that's what happened in this case.
It pisses me off because
it may just be a way of just like diverting attention from the Secret Service at this time in this one particular assassination.
Right.
But it also may be, guys laying the ground for an attack on Iran. Again, there is this faction within the U.S. government that wants to do that, and it may be part of this faction that is trying to generate more hostility, raise the temperature vis-a-vis Iran, so that when this Lebanon war finally kicks off, they can extend it to Iran. That's what those people want to do.
Right. Yeah. Well, when's Netanyahu going to be here again?
I think maybe maybe the idea is this. It's just they see that, okay, maybe after the assassination attempt, they said, okay, damn, we're going to have Trump. Well, we can use Trump to attack Iran. I mean, he already has a bee in his bonnet about Iran. And now if he takes office and believing that the Iranians wanted to assassinate him, he's just more likely to go along with the extreme anti-Iran crowd within the deep state.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe it has something to do with the fact that Netanyahu's going to be in the U.S. Is it next week? Addressing Congress?
Let's see.
Soon.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is about a week from now. Right.
Right. So I don't know if it's potentially to kind of pump, lube things up for him, so that way he can try to push this Iran war or this war into Lebanon.
Yeah. Well, that would fit into the theory that it is part of generating anti-Iran hostility, sentiment within the U.S. population, and you time it, right after Trump's assassination attempt and right before the arrival of Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy if you think about how we always say how Iran is the head of this sort of terrorism axis, that it's the head of the snake, and it's Iran is this monster and the enemy of America. And then if you can take a look, like, what has Iran ever done to the United States? Like, can you say anything that it's done?
Well, 1979. Okay, 1979. You can point to the
like
the
1,000
hostage
years
taking.
ago.
Okay, well, right. Yeah. Well, 44 years ago, or 45 years ago, rather.
Right.
I guess it ended actually like 1980 when Reagan assumed office. So, roughly 44 years ago. So that was something. But in the meantime, people, first of all, need to understand that was in response to something that we had done. We had overthrown, the CIA overthrew their democratically elected government, President Mossadegh, I think it was, in the 1950s, 1956 approximately, and installed the Shah, right? So if there was a lot of anger against the U.S., it was justified. Okay, so they struck back. It was just like, oh, these wild-eyed fanatics or whatever. You stop, learn some history, please, people, and then make some attempt at empathy. Put yourself in, in their shoes and think about, I probably would have responded the same way, right? And then since then, nothing, really nothing. I mean, there's always talk about Iranian terrorism. It's just, the few incidents that are played up just when you on close examination vanish. There's just not, they're not the source of terrorism in the Middle East. The terrorism that that takes place in the Middle East and Europe and elsewhere, and when it was responsible for 9/11, is Wahhabi Sunni terrorism. It's not Shia terrorism. I mean, I think you'd
But
be
the Sunnis
hard-pressed.
are our allies, so we can't.
Yeah,
we don't talk
right.
about
So
it.
that kind of made it hard, So we had to go after bin Laden, but we continued to work with Al Qaeda, both in Yemen and in Syria. And of course, we worked with bin Laden, before we were against him. So but we shouldn't talk about this because everything's black and white, and we're the good guys and they're the bad guys.
Okay, so 45 years since there was anything that the Iranians did to America.
Yeah.
That was in response to what CIA did in Iran. Can you
Right.
give me a really quick recap of, has the United States done anything to Iran?
Oh, yes.
Okay, can you give me a quick recap of, let's say,
well,
from then, bro, just 1979, 1980 till now. What has the United States done to
Right.
Iran? And Iran hasn't done anything back.
Right. Well, it's just over the last, especially 20, 25 years, we've been imposing sanctions on them and accusing them of trying to develop a nuclear bomb. Now, there just isn't any evidence for this. I think, like the best work on this was done by Gareth Porter, who wrote a whole book on it. Very, very carefully researched. But there's just nothing. There may have been a time when they were thinking about it, but they just chose not to do it. And, there was what they call the smoking laptop. It was just this laptop that miraculously appeared, and it's supposed to have blueprints of missiles and, nuclear devices on it. This is supposed to be proof that they had a nuclear program. But it seems clear that was a Mossad plant.
Yeah, I was about to say.
The thing, it's not just things, what Gareth Porter and other dissident journalists have said, or the Iranians themselves have said, but it was back in, I believe it was 2006, the George W. Bush administration was leaning towards an attack on Iran. They'd already attacked Iraq, and there were people, within the administration that were pushing hard for an attack on Iran. But then the CIA came out with their national intelligence assessment, and they said there's just no evidence that Iran is working to develop a nuclear weapon. And that just actually, George W. Bush in his own memoirs says that he's angry about it. He said, that just pulled the rug from under my feet. I was set to attack him. But it was just even our CIA, occasionally, back then at least, occasionally spoke truth to power, and they did. And they say, hey, we really can't find anything. And they haven't, found anything since. But we have continue to apply these sanctions to the point, where they became this really like the sanctions from hell that we applied on Russia, but much more damaging for a small country like Iran. Russia is this vast, almost like a whole continent with great resources. So I remember when I hearing about the sanctions, I say, hey, it might hurt. I expected it to actually hurt Russia, but in the end, it really didn't even do that. But they're obviously going to survive because Iran survived. And Iran has so much less in the way of natural resources and so forth. But this was, it's really impoverished Iran. Many, I don't know how many, but clearly hundreds, thousands of people have died in Iran because they weren't able to get, hospitals weren't able to acquire drugs medical supplies, equipment, and so forth. And you can even point to like the recent death of Raisi. He was flying an old U.S. copter, like they hung on to a lot of old equipment. And I think they're only now starting to replace them. And, and it was very difficult for them to get replacement parts. So there have been airplane accidents and, just people in general. So that, there's, I don't know how many, if you did a very careful research, you could kind of figure out what the excess deaths have been over the years. And I'm sure that it's in the tens of thousands. But in general, just people have been impoverished. And at the same time, there's been a campaign of assassinations, I think mostly carried out by Mossad, but Mossad and CIA proxies.
It's like the U.S. has no concept of blowback. That this idea that, hey, if you impoverish a whole nation, do this collective punishment on a country, assassinate their scientists and their political leaders, that they'll just be like, yeah, that's fine.
Right.
Go
well,
on
now
about
we love
the
the we'll overthrow our rulers and
yeah,
you know, and
start
ask the
waving
US
American
to appoint.
flags.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Of course they're gonna. It's amazing actually how much. I think latent pro-Western sentiment still exists in Iran. I mean, it used to be very strong, and if we were smart, we would have played to it and been their friend, and they could have actually supported indirect, not by any direct intervention, because people just don't like foreign nations intervening within their own societies. But just by being friendly, we would have supported the pro-Western forces within that country. But we've dealt a decisive blow to those pro-Western forces, and a lot of those pro-Western forces are just not pro-Western anymore. It's very similar to what's happened in Russia.
I was about to say,
you did
right.
see, there was a lot of pro-Western, very strong pro-Western sentiment. I mean, it was a minority, but it was especially common among the elite. Maybe it was at one time it was 25% of the country or something, but now it's down and well below 5%.
No,
You're talking
nobody
about
likes
2%.
it, right?
Yeah, and it's because of our own behavior. And then the idea is that we're supposed to bring about the downfall of Putin. What you did is you absolutely eliminated the support for the West within those countries.
Right. Yeah, it's so stupid. I feel like the United States is the only country that I can think of that has this idea of enemies. It's constantly talking about its enemies.
Right.
And we're in a position where we actually are the place where we actually are in the greatest position to not have enemies. We have two oceans on either side. We're dominant, so we don't have to. People aren't trying to attack us or do anything like this, but we keep on having this rhetoric, our enemies, China, Russia, Iran. It's like, well, China, I lived I've been in China for 10 years. I lived there 10 years. The Chinese people all loved America. Whenever I get in a taxi car, they'd say like, "Oh, I'm from the U.S." They start chatting to me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I love America," and then movies and all these things. And there isn't this. China doesn't view us as an enemy, but now they are beginning to because we're forcing them to, because we constantly keep on saying China's the enemy, and China's like, what?
And slapping sanctions on them too.
Right. It's like China's just looking at them like, what are you doing? Like, we've been selling you all this stuff. We've been, buying bonds as well, supporting your economy. What has China done to piss piss America off? What? Because they sold too many cheap goods? Because they made too many, whatever it is? It's it's crazy. And we just this
and
US...
I think in both cases it's just by being a sovereign, independent country that doesn't bow down to U.S. diktats.
Right, but you talk to people in America. So many Americans just think like, "Oh yeah, our enemies." Like that's not a normal line of thinking and thought for most people in other countries. You don't think about, "Oh yeah, I have enemies," especially they're enemies that are not anywhere are in your life. They're like these manifestations from in our minds of what an enemy is. It's something that we can't see. It's a demon. It's like a Beowulf type of. I don't even know if that analogy works, but but you know what I mean. Just this monster, distant monster kind of thing. It's a weird, very damaging part of American psyche. This idea that we have these enemies and we have to protect our freedom, because if we don't keep on blowing people up in other worlds, somehow they're going to come and take our freedoms. They're going to knock down my door and be like, "Hey, stop being so free." I don't know. It's crazy.
Right.
I mean, even in college, I remember I had I think it was a geography class I had. And it was some kind of maybe political geography. It might have been geopolitics class. I forget what it was. But on the exam, one of the questions was, why do other nations in the Middle East hate us? It was something like that. Very already loaded and weird. I'm like, what? And the multiple choice question, I got it wrong, because the answer is they hate us because of our plurality. This was a college exam. This is what the professor told us, and I got this question wrong. It's like, oh, these people hate us because of our plurality. Like, what does that even mean, to be exact? We got too many because they're so upset because we got black
many
and
different
brown
kinds of
people
people.
hanging out.
Right.
It's like it's so absurd. But
Yeah.
but that's been ingrained into
Yeah.
our society, into our
Well,
education.
I guess that's a sophisticated, college explanation, like the flyover country explanation. The George W. Bush explanation was they hate us because of our freedom.
The the elite intelligentsia. They're like, oh, it's our plurality,
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's hard to change this type of thinking within a country. I hope it's beginning to. That's why I'm excited when I listen to the RNC. There's some things that give me hope, and other things that I'm like, ooh, they really make me feel bad. Like one is like, can we get some cheers for Israel? And everyone's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh God, this is pretty gross.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that one's okay. I think in general, like these foreign policy attitudes that people have, are, again, they're a mile wide and inch deep. There's really not much to them. And then when you have a responsible leader, like on the Republican side, somebody like Walter Jones in North Carolina, or
Rand Paul.
Well, Rand Paul, or even
Thomas
more
Massey.
so his father, Ron Paul. Right. When they can go to the most conservative districts, or in the country, and win, telling them that all this stuff is nonsense, and people listen and say, hey, I know this guy is good, I believe him, and they don't really care about it. It's not something that they believe in deeply. It's just something they hear on TV, and they can, so their opinions about these other countries are just kind of shaped, but not at a deep level. I think the one problem, again, the exception to that is Israel, for the reasons that we've talked about. Christian Zionism and Jewish Zionism are real things, and they're very powerful forces in this country. And so that's going to be a hard one to overcome. But the other ones could be overcome, I think, pretty quickly if we had a responsible leadership.